Anyway.
Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Holding Court with the Empress of West Hollywood. My name is Enoch Miller, your Empress of WeHo. And we're so excited to have you with us today! We want to give a very special thank you to our amazing producers, GayLifeLA.com, as well as Kings Road Apartment Homes for the amazing space you see here today. And we're taking up the lovely space that is Brad's Cinesac's home. So thank you for this little piece of heaven that you've allowed us to stay in here at Kings Road. So we are very grateful to him. There's a lot of construction going on outside, so we are hiding away for the next couple weeks. But I do want to welcome my two amazing guests that are here with us today. From Angela's Psychology Group, we have Dr. Neil and Brennan. How are you both today?
Good.
And you both are licensed psychotherapists, and you both work at an office here in Los Angeles. Let's get to know a little bit more about the two of you and kind of what kind of background you guys have and how you guys got involved into psychology. So, Brennan, we'll start with you. Kind of talk about your upbringing and kind of really how growing up got you introduced into psychology and what you kind of wanted to get involved with it for.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like most people, I was introduced to psychology either through a high school or college course.
Okay.
And it probably began as what most psych majors say, like, I really like working with people. But I just maybe I liked it more. I also grew up in a religious community too, so kind of seeing the intersection of those in college and then in grad school helped me, I guess, differentiate, find myself a little bit more, ask harder questions that either how I was raised or my religious community would ask. So that kind of led to like a niche interest in how religion intersects with sexuality, how psychology intersects with both of those, and the answers just kept getting more and more fascinating. So I kept going into more debt, and now on the track to psychologist.
All right, and then Dr. Neil, for you getting involved and your upbringing, kind of along the same lines of what Brennan was saying, because you were introduced to psychology at a fairly young age, and how did you take that and kind of find a passion in it?
So, unlike Brennan, I was actually a math science geek in high school. I love math and science. My first degree is in chemical engineering.
Ooh.
I remember taking a psychology class in high school and thinking, this is a load of shit. This is a bunch of bunk. And I also thought it was really kind of stupid common sense. So I've always been interested, like you, in humans and the human spirit, and especially interactions and relationships, but I was really a math science person, and it took me a while to segue into the clinical work that I do now. So that came later, actually.
And I mean, you have a biochemical degree as well, and it's, what really made you switch from becoming more of the math science geek, in a sense, to psychology and to looking basically at the human psyche?
Yeah, what I can give you a story that really took me from. I actually have had 3 careers. First as a chemical engineer. Second as I had an organization development consulting firm for many years, and it was at that time I was consulting for a large Fortune 100 company, and someone came into the room. I will never forget this. It was inside, wearing Ray-Bans. And they announced that they had just met with, and they name dropped. And I knew intuitively that this person was a problem for the work team. This was an executive team I was working with, but I did not know how to handle that dynamic. I knew there was narcissism. I didn't know what it was called at the time, but I knew it was there. And I recognized in that moment, I felt like my hands were tied behind my back and I didn't know what to do. So that actually set me on the course of pursuing my second master's, my doctorate in clinical psychology. At that time, I thought I would bring it back into the organizational world. It was only when I was introduced to I think you're going to talk about this a little bit, ergonomic work, the somatic work, that then I moved entirely into the clinical work that I'm in now.
And then Brennan, with you, because you're still finishing up your degree and your master's, your doctorate.
Doctorate. Got my master's.
Yes. And what is that like for you now pursuing this career? Because I mean, doctorate obviously is very specific. So what specific way are you pursuing your doctorate, and how do you hope to use that in your career in the future? What you're going to do, is it going to follow along the same lines of what you've been doing through your therapy sessions and everything like that, or is it going to expand into something different?
You know, at this point it looks like it's along the same road, but hopefully everything expands once you're out of school and free up another, whatever, 12, 36 hours a week.
Right. So much time.
Yeah, so my dissertation is actually the one thing kind of like holding me back from finishing up. But that is also it's on sexual minorities and nice, nerdy, psychoanalytic kind of hobby of ours, which is like working with dreams. So, you know, that's one of the specialty kind of areas for me with research. But then clinically, as with Dr. Schierholz, you know, we work with personality disorders, you know, sexual diversity issues, and then we do the somatic work, which is kind of a trauma treatment and a personality treatment also.
Awesome. And you guys have you guys have both have an extensive background. Brennan, you have been doing, you're still working on your doctorate, like we just said, but you also have an MA in psychology. You're going to Fuller Psychology and Family Services, the work that you've done. Also worked at the LGBT Center as well, and their mental health, as a mental health intern there. And then Dr. Schierholz, you've been, oh my gosh, litany of things you've done. Like you said, you've had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 degrees? 4, okay, I've read this right. It's just like,
you're doing good.
Psychology, clinical psychology, MA, clinical psychology, MS, in industrial and organizational psychology, and then a BS in chemical engineering. I mean, that is a lot of schooling. And
you just couldn't decide what you wanted to do.
right, you just wanted to do it all.
Hot tip. Don't do what I did.
Right. How do you ever really bring in the chemical engineering aspect into what you do on a regular basis and your psychology work?
Almost no one ever. Yes, it's the answer. I love that you asked me that. As I've moved through my life and I've landed where I'm at, I've asked myself sometimes, why did I get this degree in chemical engineering? Why have I had these what seem to be wildly disparate interests in academic, approaches? And because of the somatic work that we do, which involves, it's a whole way of working with someone. It's not just talking, it's hands-on manipulation of the body armor to release deep trauma and emotion, chronically held emotions in the body. So all of that has a lot of biochemical chemistry involved in it, the nervous system. And what I realize is my very, very strong science background and math and chemical background really has helped me in understanding the reduction of the molecules and atoms and what's going on in a patient's body in a way I would never know if I had only studied psychology.
Wow, so it's taking a step further and not just focusing on the brain and what happens in there, it's your whole body holistically from top to bottom, atoms and all, and how that all interacts with everything you're feeling emotionally. Which is amazing. And of course that was a very dumbed down version for the smart way you just said it.
Well, another way of putting it is when you're just focusing on the brain, what we're talking about is reductionism, reducing all somebody's problems, and this is what a lot of pop psychiatry does. It's like, what are you on? Oh, I take this drug, that works wonders for me. All my problems can be solved by a pill. Whether it's what we do is more of a holistic approach, looking not only at brain, what medications someone is on, what their symptoms are, but even how they present themselves in the room, where they hold stress, tension in their body, and then their psychological narrative, who hurt you, who hurt you as a kid, all that stuff we're considering. So we're not reducing it, we're trying to get a whole picture.
Which is really, again, that's what really, I think, what anyone should look at as a psychologist, is it's not just this one little part of your life, this one little thing that's happened, it's how everything has brought you up to this point, and really define your character as an individual and a human being. So
it's interesting you use the word character, because we work with the entire character structure, not just some little symptom. Someone comes in and says, oh, I'm depressed, or my eating is disordered. or I can't sleep, or I'm sleeping too much. Those are the symptoms, but all of that lays on top of a broader characterological structure, and that's where we focus in a holistic way. Freud, which everybody knows about, focused on insight as the cure. That if the unconscious was made conscious, it would affect a cure, and out the door you would go. What we have found since that time is it's not adequate. That we've got to work with the body, especially for, like, let's say something is pre-verbal. When you're an infant, something happened, or if there's a trauma, even immigration trauma, or sexual trauma, or assault of some sort, or even just relational trauma that people have. This gets encoded. We know this is encoded differently, and we have to get at that through the body.
No, that makes sense. I mean, again, sometimes it's easier to say with your actions than it is with your words, and it's very true on that. So I'd like to also find out how the two of you met and got connected and started working together.
It sounds like we're
So, how did we meet?
I was at the LGBT Center working as an intern, and Neil was there working as a supervisor for interns. And then
I used to supervise all the psychology interns at the LGBT Center.
For the whole center?
Yeah, the one over on Schrader.
Oh, the one on Schrader. Okay.
Yeah.
But my work was just so impressive, and I healed so many people. And he was like, I gotta hire this kid. I
never saw him as a kid. You always seem...
I'm age ambiguous, I get told that. But yeah,
so you are, he is, isn't he?
I love that.
You are
true.
Age ambiguous, yes.
Someone mistook me for being in my 20s, 30s, 40s. They were just questioning it all at once last week.
And we let that sit.
I just let it sit, didn't talk.
Let that sit.
But yeah, we met there. So he supervised my work there. And then...
So I knew his clinical work, and I knew he was a good clinician.
And I think my background with not just understanding, but working with, integrating when appropriate or necessary, religion and spirituality were one of the things that you enjoyed about what I brought. I was, of course, curious about the somatic work, and then I started training in that after getting hired on at Angela's Psychology Group, before it was actually Angela's Psychology Group. But that's kind of the crux of that.
Well, and then I'm going to bring it over to you, Dr. Neil, with Angela's Psychology Group and how that got founded and started, and really kind of, I mean, since you were saying there was a different name for the practice before, was it just under your title, basically?
It was. The advice that I got, and it's just a dull kind of legalese accounting story. The advice that I received was, when you incorporate, and I've had corporations since, well, forever, my entire career, the advice was, just call it with your name. So that's what I did, and I never liked that because I don't want the practice to be associated in any way exclusively with me. We're much bigger than that, and I'm one employee and one part of the group practice. So it was about maybe two years ago now, we started talking about it, and about a year and a half ago we rebranded to Angela's Psychology Group, which is the current name and incarnation.
And why Angeles? I mean, obviously Los Angeles, in a sense, is kind of why, but why specifically taking out the Los part and making it Angela's Psychology Group?
What is that about?
We spent a lot of time on the name.
I think a lot of it.
And by the way, there's more of us than just the two of us. And so we would have these. We would have all day Saturday retreats, which always included food. Okay, for sure.
And we would just write out every name possibility, and that was the one that just rolled off the tongue most easily. It flowed. It felt appropriately sensitive. We were also toying around with logos at the time too, so it's kind of finding how both of them fit together.
No, I like that. It's really cool. And for anyone who doesn't know what Angel Psychology Group stands for, they focus on depth therapy that gets to the root cause of all sorts of struggles, rather than just reducing symptoms like they had mentioned before. They also do, which they explain a little bit, the orgonomic therapy, and that is as an integrated treatment with talk therapy. And could you guys help explain that a little bit more? It's and you guys kind of spelled that because I mean I misunderstood saying before that it's not Reiki, it's the Reikian therapy, which is different. So could you explain what the ergonomic is and then how it's different from what people think Reiki therapy is?
Yeah, so ergonomic therapy, interesting because you just asked about the company being with my name.
Right.
Wilhelm Reich, who was Freud's protege,
Okay.
and in that whole world with Carl Jung, if your viewers and listeners know that, or those sorts of people in the 20s.
And if you don't, Google it, bitch.
Yeah.
Let me seriously.
So we have Wilhelm Reich,
Okay.
R-E-I-C-H,
Right.
Wilhelm, and he was Freud's protege. He is factoid, interesting little factoid you can share, is that he is the first psychoanalyst that moved his chair from behind the analyst couch to in front of the couch
Oh.
and faced the patient and allowed the patient to see him.
Interesting.
So now, therapy is conducted
Very much like this. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that he was revolutionary at the time
Wow,
in
interesting.
doing that. He gets very little credit for that, but he's the reason why we face our patients.
Okay.
So he was the one who really pioneered this. He's the grandfather of somatic psychotherapies, bringing the body into the work like we talked about. And like, I don't want my practice associated with my name. He was similar. So he ended up calling his theory and practice ergonomic therapy rather than Reichian therapy.
Got it.
Like, nobody would say Freudian
Right,
therapy,
right.
we would say ego psychology,
Right.
no one would say Jungian, we would say depth or analytic psychology.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's really just and then to take it one step further, it is what you were saying before, physically interacting with the body and doing things physically with the body that connect to what's going on psychologically as well.
Yeah, so what a typical session might look like is patient comes in, they've already been oriented.
Right.
So when they're involved in this kind of work and this kind of treatment, they might come in and a typical session, I will talk with them for a bit. We will have some kind of talk therapy, getting a sense, doing interpretive work,
Right.
or what people would typically think of as psychotherapy. And at some point, I'll move the patient over to a mat that I have in the office.
Okay.
The patient will be partially disrobed to whatever degree they're comfortable. The reason for that is it helps me to see a lot of tonality in the body, the movement of energy through the body, if the body's flushing or getting red.
Right.
Then
Tension, all those different things.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
If they're breathing or not.
Yeah.
People unwittingly don't breathe.
Uh-huh.
They start holding their breath or doing trauma breath, which is like diaphragm up instead of
Really?
down into the belly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So you see all that obviously as they're laying there reacting to what you're asking them or what they're saying back to you.
Yeah, and usually there's a lot less talking, sometimes no talking on the mat. Then there are really three components: instructing the patient in a certain way of breathing. It's
Okay.
not yogic breathing, it's a certain way of breathing, toning, making movements, and then also intervention. That's the second part, toning, having them move under my instruction. And then the third part is hands-on intervention of the body armor. So for instance, a very typical intervention I might do, if someone has an oral block in this segment, there are 7 segments in the body, roughly, that are like rings, and sort of correspond with the chakras, and I don't want to be marrying those two.
No, but
a lot of people
that's
understand
how they
that.
interpret those with that. Yeah, I get that.
So I might press really hard on the insertion point of the masseter muscle with my thumb. It can be painful, and it can elicit a spontaneous emotional reaction.
Okay.
But I need to know where to press.
Right.
That's my job to figure that out and to press in the right spot. Help the patient to move energy into that chronically held or hypertonic muscle.
And then Brennan, Dr. Neil brought up something really important that I don't think a lot of people understand. Could you elaborate on this aspect of body armor and what that means when you see that on a patient and how that kind of represents what a patient's doing?
Yeah, I'm gonna tag team this one, but
Okay.
when we talk about body armor, we're talking about how someone's kind of character, their personality, is really embodied physically in their muscle tissue and how they carry themselves. So that it's both, like you were saying, like the tonality, kind of energy flow through
Okay.
body parts, but also literally how someone's holding themselves, how
Okay.
they sit in the chair before they're even doing that work. So it's kind of, and this develops over time by people being told, like you said, relational traumas, and that's kind of my go-to because it's the most relatable for most people.
Mhm.
Being told, sit up straight, suck
Right.
in your gut, don't do that. People learn over time not only how to hold themselves, but then they hold themselves differently due to the different relational or other types of trauma they experience. And that includes holding things in the body. One of the easiest ones for me is men, especially in a heterocentric society, they don't know how to cry. So a lot of them are armored in the kind of the throat and back here sometimes.
Interesting.
So opening the throat up, even by just going, like they begin to loosen up, and they're like, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm starting to tear up just by going, during the therapy.
Wow.
That's not free, you can't just but that's kind of one of my easy go-tos. Maybe you have something to add.
I think that's it. The arm, your question, body armor and how armor manifests physically is absolutely functionally equivalent and synonymous with one's psychological defenses. Wilhelm Reich, who we referenced earlier, made this absolutely clear. There is no difference. These are one and the same.
Wow.
So Aristotle said, what affects the body affects the mind. What affects the mind affects the body.
True.
Right?
Oh yeah, you can very much see that.
We know that we're one whole functional unit, and yet the psychological lineage has been one of privileging the mind, the head, the brain. This is where the mind is in Western culture. Other cultures place the mind in a different place. And what we're doing is saying, no, we're way more than that.
Yeah.
And just talking about stuff is not enough.
Right.
You have to, you're a whole person. We have to deal with you entirely. So the body armor is equivalent to defensive structure and psychological defenses.
Another way of putting this, just really succinctly, is most therapy, even if it doesn't try to be, can very easily just slip into thinking mode. You're thinking about your defense mechanisms, you're thinking about your thought patterns, blah, 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 blah. This is a treatment that gets you feeling in the room, partially because it's super uncomfortable.
Right.
So it gets you kind of healed and moving through feeling itself. And we match that up with thinking, we just don't throw the brain out.
Right.
But it's necessary to pair them up functionally.
Right. Oh, that's very true. And would you say this kind of method of therapy is the reason it kind of sets your psychology apart from everyone else that does psychology?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. We are a holistic practice.
Got it.
We may prescribe other forms of body work or acupuncture as adjunct with our psychotherapy. Very, very few people, even in a large city like Los Angeles, there are only a couple of us who do this kind of work.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you see therapist office across the board. So it's very interesting that there's a very small group of you that actually practice this.
I have people fly in because they can't find this kind of treatment
anywhere else.
Wow.
I have people bike in.
Nice. So we're going to get to some topics in regard to really talking about how this impacts, and especially since this is based on Gay Life LA, how LGBT individuals kind of experience mental trauma, kind of some distinctions between what mental illness really is, some mental illness myths that a lot of people typically have, and then we'll kind of talk about some different things you can do at home and how you guys can kind of get a checkup from the neck up, just with you yourself at home. So let's kind of start, and we'll talk about some of the common issues that plague the LGBT community that can harm or affect their mental health. I know some of the things that are very common around here that a lot of people know about. Substance abuse. That's a very kind of generically common one, I feel like, in the LGBT community. Would you say that's one of the more prevalent issues you see throughout your practice, or is it just usually couples along with everything else?
I mean, it shows up in so many different ways.
Okay.
Something that I'll take the low stakes drugs and you can take the fun ones. But like one thing that I'm seeing a lot of, not only in my own caseload, but when I consult with other people, it's just there's so much more cannabis abuse. now, especially now, it's just it's been easy to access for a long time, but it's just so much easier to access now. But people not understanding that their connection to weed or their use of it is emotional too, and that usually, we're going to talk about some of the other issues, but that usually ties in to other issues for sexual minorities, gay men in particular, like loneliness. There's a lot of muting of emotions, internalized homophobia, and all the complicated anger that brings up. So there's a lot of like casual, I'll speak to casual drug use, that's the way I want to put it, casual drug use to kind of mute, self-soothe, but ultimately kind of stunt growth in those areas. So that's one thing where it does come up a lot, kind of with everyone, but especially in communities where, you know, there is all this internalized trauma, there's loneliness, there's difficulty socializing in what feels like a balanced way for a lot of people. You take the hard stuff.
Well, I mean, you covered it.
I think that's really good. I mean, I don't think we need to go deeper too much on that. Dr. Neal, so random and excessive sexual encounters. Random and excessive sexual encounters in the gay community.
Yeah, and that's that's something we definitely see. The substance use and abuse. We know from research higher rates in the LGBTQ community, and then the relationship to sex, sexuality, the internalized homophobia that you talked about, bottom shaming, which is another thing that goes on, and then we've got the coupling of drug use, meth in particular, with sex and sexuality. So what I will see is gay men who come in where they are using meth, even very rarely, very intermittently, but the neural pathways and biochemically, it gets so attached to sexuality, they can't get them apart. So if they get aroused sexually, they feel the urge to use meth. If they're using meth, they want sex, and yet both are really incredibly poor substitutes for real loving relational contact.
Interesting. Those kind of couple exactly together with that. And you brought up bottom shaming, and as well as talking about body dysmorphia and the issues people have with body shaming and also bottom shaming. So I know those two aren't exclusively the same, but with body shaming and body dysmorphia, what do you see kind of that mostly prevail out in the LGBT community? Is it more just the fact that they keep like, you're not fit enough, you're not this enough, you're not a specific type? Like, how do you see that manifest?
It's interesting, they sound so similar. Bottom shaming and body shaming or body dysmorphia, and you said, oh, they're not really, they stem in many ways from the same place, which is our own internalized sexism and misogyny. That we've got all this problem with how we view gender across the spectrum, all genders, and that we still internally, collectively, exalt the masculine. We see it everywhere in our culture. We see it, the Me Too movement and the Time's Up is bringing this very much to light. We see this very much in Hollywood right now.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Right?
Oh my god, yeah.
So, bottom shaming is equated with femininity, being the receptive partner, and
being the lesser.
Yeah, and it all stems from our internalized, homophobia, our internalized sexism, misogyny. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's a lot of things we hear about, obviously, and I mean, we're all guilty of it at one time or another, and it's very interesting how that kind of brings up. And another aspect I know is very common in the LGBT community as well, domestic violence and the issues with that. And Brennan, do you have anything to add on what you see commonly in your
one of the things that I think is just so important when addressing domestic violence and sexual minority couples is the pressure to perform. And then how that functions as a barrier to getting the necessary help, or to, confessing to a friend, this is happening to me, or I did this. Because there's usually, especially like in queer communities where there's a mix and you're representing to like heteronormative friends, there's this pressure to be like, the good gay couple,
Right.
or the pristine queer couple.
Right.
So the fact that you received a shove last night really needs to be put under the rug,
Right.
so that you're not kind of embarrassing yourself or losing that status in a social group. But that's one of the things I want to say. You look like you wanted to say something.
No, I think you're onto it. It reminds me of the blog post that we wrote for I'll just make a plug for It's Over Easy.
If you're getting divorced.
If you're getting divorced. And we wrote a blog because the community fought so hard
Right.
for marriage equality, and then to look at divorce, it gets into this problem of, but this is what you all wanted.
Right, right.
Why are you getting divorced? And there's so much pressure to be the model,
Right.
the perfect couple,
Right.
have it all together. We don't argue. There's no domestic violence
Right.
going on. We're cool, and yet, like any other group of people, these things are part of our community.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's a big deal, and that can kind of couple with another aspect that you had brought up before, Brennan, about loneliness and depression, coupling with that. And I feel like that's a very common thing amongst the LGBT community, where, they have this, and this, I'm going to tie in our last one, because it is very, this is the whole aspect of social media, and the facade it plays to this, we have the perfect life, we have this, I do this, da-da-da-da, but at night, you go home alone, you don't have a partner, you don't have anyone to go home to, you're by yourself, and you think you're lonely, you're depressed, but what you show out to the world is this happy-go-lucky, everything's beautiful and blue sky kind of thing. Do you find that a very commonality of what you see with people coming in through that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of the time, even though we're treating someone at the individual level,
Right.
or the level of a couple, we also have to see like the illness or the
Right.
disorder as part of the culture.
Okay.
And one of our culture's illnesses right now is pushing acquaintanceship over friendship. And I'm sure we'll talk back about that as we talk about what to do with
Right.
our friends.
Right.
But people are constantly making kind of fragile, somewhat shallow connections, usually under the guise of networking
Right.
or what have you. But as you said, when you get home, you're lonely, and
Yeah.
there's no real manual or training method on how you make authentic friendships.
Yeah.
One helpful thing about therapy is once you begin to react to your own therapist, which we love when that happens, then there is actual opportunity to learn about yourself and what you are craving in
Wow.
relationship, because you're finally in a safe relationship and suddenly your therapist may or may not be giving you what you want.
Right.
And you have a reaction to that. So that's one way that it comes up in the context of therapy. But does it come up like all the time?
Yeah.
And for different reasons. It's complicated. It's probably not worth simplifying.
No, I was just saying, there was this great video I saw that just came out a few weeks ago. It's called Trophy Boy, and it was about this influencer whose sugar daddy broke up with him, and his life comes crashing down, and the whole facade that he's still trying to maintain is getting harder and harder to do, because now he doesn't have the lifestyle he used to have. And it's very much like that. As a gay man, he's like trying to pretend to be something he's not. And it's like he does this picture of like, last night was crazy, and he's in this dump of an apartment with like 3 pieces of furniture to his name. So it's like, again, trying to keep up his lifestyle while still trying to give, again, the world this perception of like, hey, I'm okay, nothing's wrong, I'm still good. And so it is very interesting to see that it's a very common thing in our community, and it's something that you guys see so frequently in a lot of the stuff with that.
I would say even more than frequently, it's the absolute common substrate.
Really? Okay.
Yes, I think that, we're talking about body dysmorphia, we're talking about all these isms, we're talking
Right.
about substance use, we're talking about these symptoms.
Right.
But underneath of it, there is an epidemic of loneliness and lack of contact and lack of connection that is fueling all of
Yeah,
this.
for sure. And I think people say that a lot. I mean, the way the dynamic of relationships nowadays is nothing like it was 10, 20 years ago, where you had to physically go out, meet with someone, talk with someone, whereas now it's all online. You just da-da-da-da-da on an app or on this or on that. And you never really leave your home and have these full conversations with people you've really never met before.
I have worked, for whatever reason, particularly with a lot of heterosexually identified men who have sought my. One of the reasons they come into therapy is simply to learn how to properly date a woman, and just how to not do what you just described, where everything is through a screen, but actually to interact in person and what that looks like.
Interesting. And it's amazing. There's so much more we can get into, but I'm going to go over to some mental illness and mental illness myths, because there are a lot of those. So, first one, going to a psychiatrist means you're going crazy. That is an absolute, somewhat, not absolute, that's more than less, it's an absolute myth. I mean, if you're going to a therapist and you're going to someone for help, you're not crazy. And do you see a lot of people having this kind of stigma going into potentially signing up and becoming a client, or do you feel like they're more apt to already in that mindset of being open to therapy?
It really depends. Honestly, some people will even, give us a call and want to do an intake or come in for a first session. But it's hard to kind of embrace therapy for what it might say about them.
Oh, wow.
So we, kind of specialize in weekly or more intense treatment.
Gotcha.
Treatment's less than that. Just most professionals tend to agree there's just less traction. But there's this stigma that we have to fight of, coming in weekly means you're insane.
We also are in Los Angeles, and it's, the culture here embraces it a bit more. There still is stigma, for sure, but it's not uncommon for people to speak somewhat openly. But people can also think, oh, I'm seeing a therapist, I must be crazy. Which, of course, is not a clinical term.
It's not true at all until you are committed. So, we'll get into that later. No, I'm kidding. So, mental health problems don't affect me. Do you hear a lot of people, like, just talking with someone in general, like, oh, I don't have mental health issues?
Oh yeah, all the time. I do assessments for various reasons. And they're like, oh yeah, no history of mental health issues ever. And the costing.
Explain what you mean by assessments.
Oh, so like I'll run very psychologically sophisticated tests on people, from the ink blot tests that everybody knows about, to like 500 question questionnaires, usually screening them. I do this in religious communities, I do it for workplace kind of stuff, but screening new applicants to see if there's anything problematic or anything that would help them, that they should know about themselves, or their employees should know about them before they start.
Oh, interesting.
So a lot of people are just, of course there's kind of the bias going in, I want to appear well.
Right.
But a lot of people don't want to front with their issues, or the fact that they get anxious, or the fact that they're scared of the results. But it usually comes out, one, because I'm pretty friendly when we're doing it, but two, because everybody has some facet of mental health concern. It doesn't mean that everyone has some mental illness, but unless you're remarkably well-adjusted and born into like a white person utopia where you're just afforded privilege at every turn, chances are you're going to face some stress that takes on a disordered quality at some point. And that's okay. Usually people, if they embrace that as an opportunity, usually in relationship with a trained professional, come out stronger on the other end for them.
And it's very true. Everyone has issues, people. We all do.
Psychotherapy is really an opportunity across the spectrum. If you have some kind of symptom and you feel bothered, then you seek out the treatment of a mental health professional. It can be that. It can also be the person whose life is going extraordinarily well, who is wanting to improve their game. It can be a path of self-discovery and really psycho-spiritual development.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. So the next one is, people with mental health issues are violent and unpredictable. And that is not true at all. That is only if they have very severe, there's a whole realm of that.
An impulse control disorder.
But we also have to look at it, like I said before, in terms of the culture and community. It can be a cultural, like America, gun violence. This is a cultural illness that we have, and it's emergent out of several factors. It's not just mental health, like one side tries to put it. It's not just gun laws. It's kind of an intersection of both of them.
Oh, wow.
I'm going to get in hot water for a second.
No, not with this crowd.
But violence in our culture in particular isn't. We can't flatly address it as a mental health crisis when we're not talking about the communities where those people come from.
Gotcha.
Where are their families? Where if they're straight white Christian people,
right.
Where are their churches intervening? Right. Why don't churches see them?
Right.
Or their school principal, guidance counselor, what have you.
All that stuff.
So, yes, it's true. Someone with a mental health problem will make headlines every once in a while for being violent, but it has to be way more complex than that.
Right. Exactly. There's so much more involved, and it's usually a deeper issue than just something just surface level like that. Another one. You are just sad, not depressed. Do you get people saying that, like, oh, I'm just upset, I'm not really depressed or anything like that?
Sometimes it's hard for people to determine,
what's the difference?
Yeah,
okay.
And so that's where you want to come and talk to someone. We can ask questions, we can do either an actual assessment using psychological tests, or we can do a clinical, interview and determine, if this is a diagnosable depression and what's the severity and then what the treatment would be for that.
Is it very easily distinguishable when you kind of meet someone in front of the person to kind of know, oh, I need to go down this route because more than likely I feel you're this, or is it just really a case by case basis?
That one's.
Because I know
I feel
after
stumped.
After
It's
years
so-
and years of doing it, can you kind of gauge? You've done this for long enough to kind of go like, oh, I think we're gonna need to go here, or is it still you have to kind of?
Sometimes
Okay.
I can start to get a sense of what's going on diagnostically,
Okay.
even before I've spoken with the person on the phone. Let me give you an example. The way they will try to schedule the initial phone call with me will tell me something about them.
Gotcha.
All right. So they think they're just scheduling a call with me so that they can talk and see if I might be a match in terms of a potential psychotherapist for them. But the way they approach that, perhaps they're extremely polite and overly accommodating. I already know something about them clinically. So it tells me just the way they...
It's so fascinating though that it's like, even before you've got your first session down, you've already got a sense of this personality and this type of individual and all that stuff.
For sure.
It's just
that's kind of like the wizard pulling, or Dorothy pulling back the curtain. Yeah. But like now you're seeing what we, how we think and what we really do.
But it's honestly, it's good for people to know the fact that from the first call, you guys are already trying to get a mental picture of who this individual is, so that way you can provide the best care.
We always have our therapist hat on.
Mm-hmm.
We are not chit-chatting this is not cocktail party chatter.
Right.
We are clinical and we are of use 100% of the time to our patients. That's our commitment.
But it's also very personal too,
Yeah. Oh, this is very honest. You're literally bearing your soul to someone, and body and soul in this instance with your guys' group.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's such an intimate and personal one-on-one basis that you really, you have to be open to being able to expose yourself to a lot of the stuff that you're not comfortable doing to anyone else.
But we'll give you comfort.
Right. They'll give you comfort. So speaking of comfort.
And sometimes that takes a really, really, really long time.
You can't rush it. No, nothing, especially with your mental well-being. You cannot rush any of that.
That's to insurance companies.
Well, that's a whole other fun topic.
Next time.
Yeah, next time on insurance. Yes. Alright, so another common one I hear so often, you don't need therapy, just take a pill. And how often for you guys will you prescribe medication, or do you prefer to avoid, because I know you say you're more holistic in approach, do you try to avoid any kind of medication or any kind of just like writing a script and being like, there, you're good, go?
Wow, we really could talk for hours about insurance and hours about this, but you're often more succinct than I am. So medication.
One, we're psychologists. Well, you're a psychologist, and I desperately want to be.
You will be soon.
But yeah, I'm soon to be a psychologist. But psychiatrists are the one who's prescribed. That may change in the future in California, but.
There are like 4 or 5 states where psychologists like me can prescribe, and also federal government and Guam and places like that.
Yeah.
but not in California yet.
Wow.
So technically, we're not prescribing any medication.
So that's good to know right off the bat. Then.
Right. But that's not to say that doesn't it totally intersects with our work all the time. Most psychiatrists in California, psychiatrists, not us, don't offer psychotherapy concurrently with their service of prescribing and assessing medication. So the job of tracking symptoms and how a drug treatment is going usually falls to a therapist like us. Last part of my answer is that medication alone usually doesn't get great results. Therapy alone can get better results. If you're going to use medication, the best possible outcome is doing it while you're in therapy, sharing your dosage with your complying with the medication, but letting them kind of track your behavior and your symptom and your mood, so that when you go back to the psychiatrist or your prescribing physician, whoever that is, they have an informed, medically trained opinion as well.
Awesome. Do you find it's very hard to kind of, when someone is, like, if they come to you, they've already been taking all this medication, do you find it's hard to kind of separate the pill versus the person? Or do you make them get off of it for a little time to see who they really are? Or anything like that?
So interesting, my gosh, there's so many things I want to say about this.
I know this can go on for hours and hours, obviously, because there's so much involved with it.
Historically, decades ago, patients would go on a medication fast. The reason being, so doctors would take their patients completely off the psych meds so that you could see the clinical picture clearly. Right. We no longer do that. Okay. So it does cloud the clinical picture. Most people come to us because they want off the medication. Okay. I'll just give this little factoid. Yeah. SSRIs, which are antidepressants, are very, very, very heavily prescribed in our country. 70%, more than half of the effect is a placebo. I could give you a sugar pill, and your mind would give you the same result. Yes. These are really... You really want to think clearly. You definitely want to have psychotherapy, then maybe meds coupled. Do not do the med route alone. It's just not effective. The psychiatrists out there can yell at me about this.
But it really goes back to your point, the fact that you're saying the mind affects the body. I mean, you tell the mind it's getting drugs, it's going to make itself think it's getting the drugs.
Yes. Yeah.
And so then you're not really getting an absolute truth to what's going on, because again, the brain's playing tricks on the body.
And mentally, like, telling yourself that all it always is, in all cases for me, it's a neurotransmitter, meaning brain chemical imbalance. So I just need to take my pill, drink my orange juice, and I'm good.
Good to go.
That oversimplifies the problems of a usually complex person. Most people I meet are actually more complex than they give themselves credit for. So, the problem is kind of education and what's out there in our culture too. And I think that's what you're getting at with the original question, because a lot of people just want to compare what drugs their psychiatrists have them on and get the best one. But the problems are deeper than that, and we want to take them seriously.
Yeah, well, it's like you said, to be true. I mean, there's so much more trauma that someone may not realize was trauma until they sit down and go, holy crap, that was traumatizing.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's buried.
Yeah.
I got to say this one thing about big pharma and insurance, because we've touched on it. There's a reason that you see all the commercials for psych meds. Yeah. It's because they're inexpensive, they are a quick fix, they've been heavily promoted, they're easy to research because it fits into that Western reductionistic pieces and parts way that the Eurocentric mind, and how most of us have been schooled. This is not a holistic approach. It's not a collectivistic approach. Other cultures would think, what are you thinking here?
A lot of them do.
Insurance loves this because it keeps their costs low and their profits high, and the shareholders are happy with this. Psychotherapy is an expensive sitting in the chair treatment that insurance companies typically do not like to pay a lot for. So
they'd rather take the drugs than the actual foot the bill.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't affect a cure. It masks the symptoms.
Yeah. And it really just kind of placates a person, and it just kind of dumbs them down.
And the side effects can be really debilitating for people.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's a necessary boost to get through the course of therapy too. I don't want to just trash all SSRIs, but
absolutely.
Sometimes. So it's not a one-way approach with us too.
Right.
We really try to look at each patient differently.
But you're not the type that's just like, here, slap a drug on it and we're good to go.
Right.
Yeah. It's a whole it's a holistic approach where it might be necessary, but we want to make absolutely sure that it is. And then another one, which I do feel a lot of people said, if you feel better, you are cured. And that also cannot necessarily always be the case sometimes too. Because there might be something else, you might feel better for right now, but something might trigger something later. Do you kind of, when this patient comes up to you and says, oh my God, I feel so much better, I'm good, done now, what was your response to something like that?
It could be a flight to health, what we call a flight toward health, where they're wanting to placate us and try to convince us that they're better and they need to get out of treatment. That can often precede an unconscious awareness in the patient that they're about to encounter something that's been really difficult for them to look at.
Oh wow!
So sometimes there's a flight to health right before something really big opens up. So we need to work with that and keep the patient in treatment. The other thing is feeling better and getting better are two different things.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think your question highlighted that.
Yeah, no, it's really, and that's really the fact of the matter is feeling better and getting better. And that's the whole concept of what you were just saying. It's not just because you feel better. And I really think that's kind of interesting that our bodies will do that subconsciously. To kind of be like, oh, I'm good to go, thank you so much. Want to go? And you're like, wait a minute, I think we need to get to the good stuff right now. And do you, how do you actually kind of, I mean, obviously there's no one way to kind of be like, oh my gosh, you're cured, you're good to go, whatever. How do you make an assessment to where someone has kind of, maybe when they're ready to be done with therapy and you feel like that they've gotten at least to a point where they understand, recognize, and know all the issues in their lives, they're dealing with it in the appropriate manner. How do you kind of be like, okay, we can be done with therapy now if they would like to be done with therapy?
Your question is asking what is a definition of health? And we have to answer that first to determine when someone's ready to be discharged from therapy.
Right.
Every therapist and every practitioner, every doctor is going to have a different definition based on the training. I can tell you what mine is. And I can say I've been very, very fortunate to have just a few people where I've said, I'm going to, send you off into the world and usher you out the door. Often people will end treatment because they've done a piece of work and they feel complete, and that's fine. And then they might come back, 6 months, a year, 2 years later.
That's most people,
That's most people. Those people who I have said, you're done, these are the things I look for. A complete, full, orgastically potent sexual functioning. What I mean by that is the ability to have a potent orgasm in the sexual embrace with a loved other, in whatever way that takes form. That is, the French call it the little death. I can't speak French, but there's some French thing, la petite mort or something. It is the obliteration of the self and the communion with one's loved other, the environment, and the cosmos. Most people, when I describe this, have no idea what I'm talking about. That is an essential piece, and that is a mark of health. An innate internal moral compass that's not subject to the mandates and edicts of culture and society. So here we have what you've been bringing in, the larger sociocultural, socio-political, where someone is a decent, a morally decent human being because that is who they are inside, not because there's a rule or a law, okay? The ability to aggress and get one's needs met without trampling on the needs of others, the ability to experience expansive, huge, pleasurable states. Most people, they say they want it, but in fact, most people are accustomed, I was going to say habituated, but I was told
to avoid words like habituated.
People are accustomed to being contracted and in states of unpleasure or displeasure. we don't think that, but we go around. That's how most of us
people
live
are
our
completely
lives.
miserable. Oh yes, they totally are. Yeah. They're happy in misery.
Yes, but to actually be expansive and in contact with the ecstatic joy that life can afford, that's the challenge. So these are some of the things I look for as a patient nears the end of treatment. The other thing is they start to see me as who I really am.
Okay.
They're not projecting their fantasies and their suppositions onto me, but they start to actually experience me as an actual real person in the world.
Interesting. And they really kind of, do they separate you, not as completely, but separate you out of the doctor role and treat you more as an individual, and that's kind of what you mean by that?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll start to see that.
Awesome.
It doesn't mean there's no boundary violation, there's nothing social.
Right,
but
right.
They will have an actual real curiosity about who I am.
Right.
As a person.
Yeah, they're treating you like an individual and not like, oh, you're my doctor, you're my therapist, you're my da-da-da-da.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of patients think that they're there and having like a genuine curiosity, but it's really, and there's nothing wrong with this, we all do it.
Oh yeah.
But it's really trying to meet some internal need too.
Right.
So there's a difference between the state you're describing and when they're like, well, why won't you tell me about where you live?
Right.
You know,
Right.
That can be something that we work through in therapy to get to what you're describing.
Yeah. And let's get to some really fun, kind of just quick little like at-home practices for kind of giving yourself your own little mental health check. Is there maybe like 2 or 3 things you guys could give us to just kind of really, again, nothing super technical, and it doesn't have to be something super profound either, but things that you kind of maybe do for yourself or personally, like any affirmations or anything like that you kind of do in order to kind of make sure you're doing okay and things are going well for your personal life?
I'm going to let you start.
You
said
I'm gonna
spike.
I'm gonna go because you said this. I'm gonna just self-disclose what I do.
Okay.
I can tell you 2 things that I do. I sleep a lot.
Okay.
Okay. People don't get enough sleep.
True. This is very true.
I sleep a lot.
And
I drink a lot of water.
Okay.
So I'm constantly running between sessions. I'm constantly running to the bathroom. So those are 2 things I do. They're simple, but they have become very strong habits. I'm always drinking water, and I'm not always sleeping, but I sleep a lot.
Well,
and I would prescribe both of those for most anyone. Just start with something simple like that. Just add something like that to your life. And it affects your mental health.
Yes. No, it totally does. I mean, the state you're being physically, obviously.
Yeah.
My answer is just breathe.
Okay.
So many people, like I said before, a lot of people breathe from here up, not down into their belly because it doesn't look attractive.
Right.
But that's kind of how the body is built. To fill up, the diaphragm expands, the
Right
body
there,
fills down
right.
here. Then your gut brain, where there's a bunch of nerve endings down here,
Yeah.
can actually get a little stimulation.
Wow.
And you can actually see what you feel.
Yeah.
So do that, feel what you feel, call me,
Yeah.
and come to therapy.
We'll get that. No, I will give you the information to call them and get the checkup you really need. And then maybe some, because we've had a lot of this happen in the LGBT community, especially recently here in the West Hollywood community, where you find out people are suffering from depression, suffering from self-harm thoughts and things like that. What are maybe something you can kind of help identify if a friend or someone out there is maybe at risk for either self-harm or risk of depression, and maybe it's a way you can approach that person as a friend saying, hey, I noticed this, how are you doing, is everything okay? Like how would be the best kind of watch signs or kind of warning signs for something like that?
I noticed that there was one word you did not use in your question, which I'm going to say, and that word is suicide.
True, yeah.
That is the word to use.
Okay.
So rather than talking around, you go directly.
Okay.
It's refreshing, and it helps people to feel seen.
So being direct.
Yes,
Okay.
and even talking openly about suicidal ideation, which is like thinking about suicide.
Right.
Or self-harm, because there's a lot of that too. Cutting behaviors come to mind, or purging, or restricting eating.
Right.
These are all self-harm behaviors.
Well, and technically substance abuse is an aspect of self-harm too as well.
Yeah, it can be looked at that way for sure. I'm reminded of what colleagues and friends of, I'll bring in Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, and Kate Spade. 3 in the last year or 2
a couple years,
of notable suicides. all of them have friends who would have said in the week prior to them taking their own lives and killing themselves, who would have said they're doing great. So don't be fooled if your friend is looking like they're doing okay. Sometimes that's that flight to like energize. Sometimes that can precede a suicide attempt. So you want to just check in with people and be serious about it and be direct.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo that. But I would just say, reassess what it looks like to be a good friend and a good community member, because it's not just individual issues, they're community issues. Like you're pointing out, how do we do this for our friends? What does a good friend do? They ask tough questions. They are direct. They show up. They say the hard things, like, maybe you should see someone, or like, we've been talking about this for 3 weeks, and I think it's beyond my scope. So things like that, I think just showing up for people in a real and genuine way, and then assessing, are people showing up for me in a real and genuine way? Finding those friends, finding someone you can work with to find out what blocks there might be. I think those are always really important. No, definitely. And I think it's very true, is to quit beating around the bush, say what you need to say. And I mean, it's if you approach it as, again, I'm here for you as a friend, even if they take it the wrong way, you can still say, I approached it the right way. And I'm just letting them know I'm there for you. Again, it's never a bad idea to talk to your friends and always make sure things are going well no matter what's going on, because you never know, unfortunately, with stuff like that. And as good as you think they might be. So I want to thank you both so much for coming and speaking with us today. I've been a wealth of knowledge and really just kind of taking a mental look at what our community was like and who we are as individuals, because we are fucking busily complex and it is a lot. So, if you ever need a checkup from the neck up to the head down, you can go here to Angela's Psychology Group, and it's just at Angela's Psychology Group, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or angelospsychologygroup.com, and check out all the information about the two of them, as well as the rest of their staff that are there. Great team, and they're local here in LA, so if you do feel like you need to talk with someone, these two gentlemen, as well as the people on their staff, are great to speak with. And the litany of knowledge you'll get is really amazing. Plus, it's a hands-on approach, so that's what you like to have. And again, special thank you. Hands-on. Yes, hands. Special thank you to GayLifeLA.com, as well as Kings Road Apartment Homes, Brad's house. Thank you so much for everything you do with us today. We'll catch you guys out next week. Thank you, and bye!